Something about this week moves differently. The pace isn't fast or slow, it's slanted. Time feels like it's leaning inward, as if the usual rhythm of cause and effect got interrupted mid-sentence. The moon, normally a passive witness, seems to be speaking this time. Not loudly, but with intent. Something subtle has realigned, and the atmosphere is registering it like an old radio picking up a forgotten frequency. Most people walk past this shift, too distracted or numb to notice. But those attuned to the emotional undertow might already feel off balance. Not tired, not emotional, just misaligned. Have the days been harder to explain lately? Has something invisible been weighing heavier than usual? Between June 7th and 14th, the moon drifts through spaces it doesn't usually pass untouched. Not just phase changes, but pressure points in the cosmic structure, thin zones where reality bends more easily. These aren't dramatic collapses or revelations. They're more like mirrored surfaces that now reflect crookedly. Light comes back fractured, so do thoughts, so do memories. And if a person is the kind that feels things before they can name them, this week might feel like trying to walk straight on shifting ground. Is it possible some bodies are more tuned to these shifts than others? If the answer is yes, then this week isn't random. It's personal. What's coming next might just be the missing piece you didn't know you were looking for. Hit subscribe, because the next message wasn't meant to be missed. Certain weeks don't knock. They slip in unnoticed, settle into the nervous system, and start rearranging the furniture. This one is built like that. Its presence isn't loud, but its effects are immediate. Strange dreams that feel more like memories. Irritation that doesn't quite have a source. A vague sense of emotional humidity. Thick, unseen, but impossible to ignore. These aren't just mood swings or fatigue. They're atmospheric, subconscious responses to something the intellect can't quite track. Sound familiar? Or is it just coincidence that these sensations intensify around the same time each month, like clockwork rerouted through fog? June 6th carries its own secret architecture, a day designed to appear unremarkable, just another notch on the calendar. But astrologically, it holds a quiet rupture. On this day, the moon glides directly across the path of Spica, a star known for holding the kind of balance that calms deeper waters. When that anchor goes momentarily dark, equilibrium doesn't just wobble, it questions itself. For those more porous to cosmic fluctuations, this can manifest physically, emotionally, or even spatially. Misplacing time, forgetting conversations, or feeling stretched between two realities. But the question lingers. Are these just random symptoms, or clues that something larger is recalibrating beneath the surface? Sometimes the sky runs interference, a signal that once cut cleanly through the static. Suddenly it's gone, just for a while. In that gap, something subtle goes missing, and the absence becomes louder than the presence ever was. The celestial point, traditionally known for delivering clarity and coherence, the kind of energy that helps everything line up neatly, finds itself momentarily silenced. As the moon crosses its path, the usual pulse of inner alignment gets clouded. Thought becomes fog. Emotions misfire or arrive late. Conversations feel off-key, as if someone's holding back or speaking in code. Have you noticed it? That strange hush behind people's words? If you understood even part of this, it means the signal is reaching you. Subscribe. The rest will make sense soon enough. This kind of interference doesn't announce itself with drama. It moves like a soft malfunction, small dissonances that add up. A familiar rhythm goes missing, and intuition, usually reliable like muscle memory, starts hesitating. The internal compass spins slightly off-center, and while everything looks normal, something underneath doesn't feel quite right. It's not chaos exactly, more like emotional vertigo, the kind of energetic mismatch that makes a person pause mid-thought and wonder, what just shifted? It raises a deeper question. When guidance disappears, even temporarily, does the confusion reveal more than the clarity ever did? Not every shift in consciousness feels grand or spiritual. Sometimes it just feels like confusion. Words get tangled, intentions get misread. A person speaks clearly, but something about the delivery bends in midair, and what lands isn't what was sent. The experience is subtle but deeply disorienting. It's easy to blame the self. Was it phrased wrong? Or was the listener just not present? But then it happens again and again, and the pattern starts to reveal itself. What if neither party is off? What if the breakdown is atmospheric, not personal? Strange, isn't it? How certain days warp language, like sound bouncing inside a glass tunnel. Still thinking about what you. That's not an accident. Subscribe. Let what's waking up in you keep unfolding. This isn't metaphor, it plays out in live time. The lunar field during this window creates a kind of static in the emotional circuitry. Not harsh, not chaotic, more like a soft smudge across the lens of interpersonal understanding. Reactions seem out of sync. Conversations stall or loop. It's not that clarity disappears entirely. It just turns slippery. The kind of slipperiness that makes a person question their tone, their meaning, their very sense of presence. Is that what's really happening? Or is something playing tricks just beneath the surface of shared reality? When even basic communication feels tinted with ambiguity, what's the best way to move forward? Insist on clarity or surrender to the fog and listen differently? Sometimes distance doesn't feel like space. It feels like silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that builds between two people sitting in the same room who suddenly realize they're on different wavelengths. Around June 7th, the moon reaches apogee, pulling away from Earth with the quiet gravity of someone leaving a conversation mid-sentence. And when it does, the sense of detachment isn't just celestial, it's personal. Emotions flatten out. Connections feel muted. The day unfolds normally on the outside, but inside there's a strange vacancy, like watching one's own gestures from behind a layer of frosted glass. Ever notice that feeling where everything technically happens, but none of it quite lands? That sense of hovering above one's own life isn't just existential pondering, it's energetic. The apogee moment suspends normal emotional rhythm, creating a kind of inner delay. Responses lag. Words arrive too late to match the moment they were meant for. People speak, but the meaning feels a step removed. And even the inner dialogue becomes vague. Less like a conversation and more like hearing old thoughts bounce around in an empty room. It's not numbness exactly. It's more like temporary dislocation. And in that floaty, unanchored space, a deeper question emerges. What happens when the mind drifts too far to catch what the heart is trying to say? The night surrounding June 7th holds a different kind of weight. Not heavy, but disorienting. Sleep doesn't offer rest so much as entry into a strange terrain where the unconscious spills its ink across the walls of the mind. What shows up in dreams might seem chaotic or surreal or even unsettling, but none of it is random. These images are not fragments to be dismissed. They're reflections that don't rely on logic to be true. Themes may loop, characters may shift. The plot, if it can be called that, resists explanation. But beneath the confusion, something deeply specific is surfacing. Is it possible that the parts of the psyche we ignore during daylight hours use the night to slip past our defenses? This isn't the night to solve things, not the night for final answers or bold declarations. June 7th marks a drift, both emotional and spiritual, that loosens the usual anchors. When the soul wanders, it picks up residue. Old fears resurface. Long-forgotten memories reassemble themselves in coded language. Some dreams echo lives that haven't been lived yet. Others return to moments long buried but never resolved. And what then? Should they be decoded or simply felt? Maybe the point isn't to interpret them, but to acknowledge that something unknown still seeks recognition. And if that's the case, how much of waking life is shaped by what never had a voice to begin with? There are days when presence becomes a performance, and emotion drifts like a lost signal, technically still transmitting, but too far out to be received. During apogee, this phenomenon becomes especially pronounced. The surface might seem calm, even composed, but beneath that stillness lies a kind of numb disconnection. The world doesn't stop functioning, but something internal does. Decisions made in this zone can carry a strange aftertaste once clarity returns. A conversation that felt neutral might echo later with unintended sharpness. A silence might be misread as final. And once the signal comes back, it's not uncommon to look around and ask, who said that? Who made that call? There's a seductive weightlessness to emotional distance. It mimics relief. But there's a difference between space and absence. Apogee offers the illusion of clarity by stripping away feeling, like muting background music to focus on words. And in that silence, it's easy to believe the story's over, or the connection no longer matters. But is that truth, or just the echo of a temporary dislocation? The disorientation isn't failure, it's function. It signals a necessary drift, but not a destination. So if identity feels shaky, or the heart strangely quiet, maybe it's not about being broken. Maybe it's just about waiting for the signal to return before deciding what really matters. How long can a person hold space without rushing to fill it? Some moments don't announce themselves with force. They slip in subtly, dressed in stillness. The full moon on June 7th is one of those moments. At a glance, it carries none of the grandeur often expected from lunar peaks. In fact, it might seem less impressive than usual, smaller, dimmer, almost anticlimactic. But that's the trick. Just because it looks quiet doesn't mean it lands softly. Following directly after apogee, this moon holds tension in its restraint. It acts less like a spotlight and more like a fuse, unassuming, thin, nearly invisible until it's too late to put out. Isn't it strange how the most explosive shifts begin with the softest sparks? This full moon doesn't explode on contact. It infiltrates. It threads its way through timelines like a silent switch thrown in the dark. It doesn't roar, it rewrites. And yet there's often a delay in recognition. It may not be until days later that the magnitude of this lunar ignition is fully felt. Subtle shifts in relationships, realizations that hit too cleanly, or internal doors quietly unlocking without conscious permission. It marks a turning point, but refuses to dramatize itself. And maybe that's the most dangerous kind of change, the kind that doesn't feel like transformation at all until the before and after can no longer be mistaken. So, is it possible that stillness, too, can be a kind of pressure? One that builds in silence and rearranges everything it touches? This particular lunar phase earns its name not from what it is, but from what it hides. The so-called mirage moon presents itself with composure. It doesn't shimmer or flare. It remains still, understated, nearly indifferent. But like all illusions, it's built on distortion. Under this sky, clarity becomes performance. Everything appears intact, balanced, even peaceful. And yet, right beneath the surface, something restless stirs. It's the kind of energy that doesn't speak, but listens, collects, compresses. It waits, and when it moves, it doesn't knock politely. It splits open the internal landscape where fragments once buried begin to shift underfoot. Has there been a moment lately that seemed ordinary, only to ripple back with unexpected weight? This is the real signature of the mirage moon. Emotional contradiction, a sense of calm that's laced with quiet static, a smile that feels sincere and yet strangely hollow. The psyche starts broadcasting two channels at once, one saying everything's fine, the other whispering reminders of the unresolved. And while the mind may try to filter it out, the body knows better. Muscles tighten, breathing shallows, memory spikes. Not dramatically, but in micro movements that suggest an old story is being rehearsed without permission. So what does one trust in moments like these? The appearance or the undercurrent? Maybe the mirage isn't there to deceive at all. Maybe it's there to draw attention to what's usually, and in that case, what quiet emotion has been asking to be felt all along? Some lunar cycles arrive dressed like resolution, but carry the scent of repetition. This one, in particular, hints at closure, promises of clarity, breakthroughs hovering just within reach, only to reroute the process entirely. Instead of finishing a chapter, the story folds back on itself, revealing an earlier thread left frayed and unresolved. It's maddening, especially for those tuned to their inner work. Progress feels palpable, momentum undeniable, and yet an invisible threshold refuses to give. What once looked like a destination turns into a hallway. Have there been moments lately that felt like déjà vu with teeth? Old emotions returning not as guests but as gatekeepers? Some moons illuminate not what's ahead, but what was left behind. This cycle stirs the dust on conversations abandoned earlier in the year. Those half-formed choices, silent endings, deferred truths. Energies suspended between action and avoidance begin to condense again, not with dramatic entrance, but with eerie subtlety. A name appears, a message reemerges, a mood enters the room before the person does. The echoes from January to March aren't echoes anymore. They're footsteps, walking straight through the present moment as if no time passed at all. Has something re-entered your space lately that felt strangely unfinished, like a door that was never properly shut? Sometimes a voice escapes the mouth before the mind even recognizes its origin. It's not memory, it's not planning, it's something older, something quieter. Words arrive wrapped in a strange certainty, as if borrowed from a source beyond the threshold of thought. This full moon isn't simply bouncing light off a distant stone in the sky. It's bouncing truth off the walls of a life that may no longer fit. The kind of light that doesn't just illuminate, it exposes, not with cruelty, but with precision. And when it does, what had been shoved into corners begins to move again. The silence breaks, not with noise, but with realization. Ever feel like something just clicks, and suddenly everything that was buried insists on being seen all at once? That's the kind of cycle we're in. What follows isn't always relief. Sometimes it's a deep rearranging, quiet, slow, undeniable. And no, this isn't about past events coming back. It's about the echo of what those events meant, finally catching up. The kind of echo that doesn't fade until something inside finally answers. So let's ask this together. What is being rearranged right now that doesn't want to return to how it was? Something peculiar stirs in the background of this week. Something that doesn't announce itself with volume, but with familiarity. Not the kind found in faces or places, but in sensations that feel borrowed from another time. It's as if the inner world has been storing fragments in quiet vaults, and now suddenly, the locks dissolve. What was suppressed near the year's beginning hasn't vanished. It's been orbiting in silence, waiting for the right atmospheric conditions, emotionally, cosmically, biologically, to return to the surface. And isn't it strange how the air feels thicker now? Like it's holding signals that never got delivered? Unsent thoughts, nearly made decisions, even alternate versions of life that nearly happened. They're all resurfacing. But this isn't memory, it's pattern recognition in motion. The moon right now is functioning less like a calendar marker and more like a trigger for emotional recursion. Not a loop exactly, more like a magnetic pull from the inside out. So let's pause and be real for a second. Is it possible that the very thing dismissed earlier this year was never meant to disappear, only to delay its arrival? Some chapters don't return to be reread. They resurface to be erased properly. What seems like repetition is often the body of an old experience finally detaching from the system. The habits once thought broken, the decisions that felt solid back in January, they don't reemerge to undo progress. They appear because the deeper mechanism behind them has begun dissolving, and in doing so, it reveals its final shape. This isn't karma biting back or some cosmic reprimand dressed in déjà vu. It's a subtle filtration process, like an internal compass sweeping over forgotten terrain, highlighting what still hums beneath awareness. And if that feels too familiar to ignore, maybe it's not returning at all. Maybe it never really left. Funny how certain energies mimic presence even after we think we've let them go. But this time, it feels different, doesn't it? Not aggressive, not shaming, just a kind of spiritual calibration, exposing residues that were once too embedded to extract. So ask this out loud just to hear how it lands. What if this is not the past returning, but the system quietly making room for what comes next? There are moments when the mind drifts, seemingly at random, to a face that hasn't been near in months, not out of longing, but through some kind of atmospheric bleed. A flicker of emotion that doesn't belong to the present suddenly colors the hour. And then comes the gesture, an old reflex, a behavior that once marked a previous version of self, repeating not loudly but with just enough force to be noticed. These are not failures in healing. They are signals in transit, The system is discharging memory, not relapsing into it. Still, there's a strange irony at play. If these pulses go unacknowledged, they can calcify and remain embedded, waiting for the next lunar disturbance to shake them loose again. And doesn't that raise a bigger question? How many emotional patterns are simply trying to exit through awareness, but get mistaken as setbacks? This isn't about returning to the beginning. It's about making space for the body to finally finish what the mind assumed was done. Recognition doesn't trap them. Denial does. So pause here. What sensations lately feel out of place but persistent? Maybe they're not here to haunt. Maybe they're here to leave. Some things don't need to be fixed. They just need to be seen. The past doesn't always return with a demand. Sometimes it simply arrives to be acknowledged one last time. A passing thought, a memory's edge, a sensation that has no current reason. When met with quiet attention rather than resistance, it begins to unravel on its own. Not every thread needs to be pulled. Some just want the light, and that's exactly what's happening now. The sky is reactivating a specific corridor, a spatial echo from earlier in the year, stirring dust that settled in places most forgot to sweep. But here's the strange beauty of it. This isn't a reversal, it's a release. A map being traced in reverse, not to send anything back, but to untangle what still quietly clings to the psychic edge. Curious, isn't it, how even unresolved emotions have a schedule, and when they reappear, they don't always want to stay. So here's a question to sit with for a moment. What part of the past might be asking not to be relived, but simply recognized so it can finally leave? There's a common misunderstanding that astrology only speaks in archetypes, traits, forecasts, personalities, but that barely scratches the surface. When lunar patterns destabilize, particularly during weeks charged with orbital tension, the effects are not symbolic, they're somatic, and it doesn't require belief for the impact to register. A shift in sleep cycles, a surge of untraceable emotion, sudden waves of tiredness or clarity. These aren't mood swings, they're field fluctuations. The nervous system, the breath, even the electromagnetic pulse of the heart. Everything subtly reconfigures under certain lunar thresholds. And while most dismiss it as coincidence, those with heightened sensitivity often notice a strange alignment. Something internal begins shifting just as something above begins moving. Odd timing, right? But maybe it's not timing at all. Maybe it's resonance. So here's something to really consider. How many recent symptoms have been treated like random glitches when they might actually be signs that the body is translating sky language directly into feeling? Lately, there's been a kind of distortion beneath the surface of daily life. A quiet scrambling of perception that feels like static woven into thought. Not enough to trigger alarm, but enough to notice. An eerie tone in the background that doesn't belong to any device, or a mental haze that makes even simple actions feel floaty and misaligned. It's not fatigue. It's not distraction. It's something less obvious, like the nervous system brushing up against a signal that isn't meant to be there. Conversations drift mid-sentence, tasks evaporate halfway through, and that subtle pressure, that faint wrapping around the head like a field trying to tether to a misfiring frequency, keeps showing up. Some might call it coincidence or stress, but what if this is a response to something energetic, not emotional? A form of ambient interference brushing against the edge of conscious function. And here's a thought worth lingering on. What if reality has been layered lately, and this fog isn't a flaw in the mind, but evidence that something else is trying to tune in through the gaps?